everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Mask. I'm one of your co-hosts, EJ, and joining me today is T.
Hello.
This episode is episode 20, which we're going to be calling The Masks of an Observer. Just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or medical professionals. Today, we wanted to talk about something a little different than what we've been doing, but kind of goes along with what we've been discussing with, anxiety, depression, and even a few of the other episodes. So as you noticed, Lori is not with us today. She's actually been pretty sick. About 2 weeks ago or so, it's actually right after we recorded our last episode, she ended up in the hospital with COVID. And it really hit her pretty bad. And it was very tough because being a COVID positive patient, she couldn't have visitors. We couldn't go see her. We were talking to her as best we could, but when you're sick, the last thing you want to do is keep texting and talking to people on the phone. And she was having a lot of breathing issues. And I felt helpless. Like I didn't feel like I could do anything. So I did what I could, which was, communicate with the groups that her and I are a part of, keeping Tina posted as best we could, because, sometimes one of us would get a message and the other one wouldn't, and just trying to self-care myself, because it's hard. It's hard to watch a friend or a family member. And we've all experienced various ways of doing that. And it can really put a strain on your emotions. And, we talked last week about depression, and we talked a lot about anxiety the episode prior. That's a huge factor on all of that. I mean, I think about all the times where, I was taking care of my parents, and even as a, home care aide where I'm taking care of, adult clients who have needs, seeing them when they're sick or down, it's just really tough because you feel helpless. Like you can only do so much. Yeah. Tina, do you have anything to share or add?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% that, and we don't live in the same town as Lori. And so that's a factor too, is what do we do and how do we do it? And considering the logistics of living so far away, and in your case, EJ, you live, a few hours. I live about an hour and a half away, depending on traffic. But yeah, for you, that's even farther. So that distance is definitely a factor in that too. Mm-hmm. So it definitely becomes difficult.
Yeah. Well, and like I think I had shared one day, I was like, man, because one of the things was the being positive with COVID was what was holding me back. Because I wasn't sure if she was still positive for COVID. Because after she was in the hospital for a short time, some of the issues she was having began to spring up as COVID related, but not specifically COVID. So it was like COVID was causing other things to happen with Lori. We won't go into all the medical, like actually what happened, but it was touch and go there for a few days. And I would have, in a heartbeat, I would have been in the car and over there with the things we were being told. I would have been over there in a heartbeat. But, with her, I couldn't go visit her. And, and I know she super appreciated the day that you went over and helped just do her laundry and clean out the refrigerator to get the junk out of there that was going to go bad.
Right.
Just because those were things we could do.
Right. Exactly. It was kind of interesting because it's not like, I mean, I really didn't have a lot to do. Clean out the refrigerator, and I chose to do up bedding and stuff like that so she could have clean bedding when she came home. And that was just something I had control of, something I could actually do. And then when I was there, I know Lori. I know she likes to have a say in things, and I knew she was missing home. She was very, very homesick. That's why she put off going in for so long. Right. Is she didn't want to be away from home and in the hospital, Right. So.
And rightfully so. A lot of people have that. They want to stay home and home, and that's why home care aides, the job I do, is very popular and common now.
Yeah,
because so many people
by your
stuff.
Home.
Yeah, that's where you're comfortable.
Yep, that's your safe place. And Lori's worked really, really hard on setting that apartment up as her space. This is the first time she's ever had something like that, and and so everything in there is Lori, and reflects who she is, and the things that she likes and loves. And so so I knew she'd be missing that. So and having, like I said, some power over something. So I got her on video chat and walked her around her place and said,
Mhm.
okay, what do you want done with this, and what do you want done with that? I was a little concerned that it was going to overwhelm her, but she just was on cloud nine for a while. I left the video just running out in her sunroom because I know that's her favorite
Mhm.
space while
Awesome.
I was off doing things and whatnot. So that that felt good to have that to be able to do,
Right.
and drop things off for her
Yeah.
and whatnot. So
Right. And yeah, she called me, I think the night before they were talking. She finally got to a point where she was going to be discharged. So she called me. She's like, I need to process through some things. I need some help, you know. So we talked. And she's like, it was the logistics. Cause unfortunately the caregiver that she had, cause she does have a caregiver, had to pick up a new client because we honestly were told she could be in the hospital a couple of weeks, you know? So it was, kind of one of those things where it's like, this isn't just going to be a couple of days, your recovery, you go home. This was, you know, because the things that were happening were things that, you know, couldn't really be resolved at home. And she needed to be monitored around the clock. So when she did finally get to a point where she was healthy enough to go home, you know, we were processing through like, how's that going to work? What can we do? Because without having a caregiver and eyeballs on you, because she does, you know, in her case, you know, the kids are in and out when they can, but they're got families and lives too. So it's it was concerning knowing that she was going to go home without a caregiver because the other, you know, her caregiver had picked up a new client, and rightfully so. You know, unfortunately, in the caregiving world, as I've recently experienced, you know, I was out for about a month from one of my clients because they had something happen. And they were in the hospital. And so we were like, does Lori need to go into like a skilled nursing facility while we're waiting to get a caregiver process through? But she's like, nope, I'm going home. And she was determined on that, which was her right. Um, and so we just kind of, you know, brainstormed some things she could do and how she could do it to make it most successful for her. You know, things like, you know, communicating, texting. I was like, I know texting is going to be hard, but when you wake up, text them, text your kids, text me, you know, whatever. You know, when you go to bed, let them know that you're going to bed. You know, even if you talk with them throughout the day, just say goodnight to them. I said that's going to be reassuring for them. Um, you know, because coming home, and so, you know, as an observer, that it's, you know, being in that situation, I'm like, I was taking care of both my parents. So, you know, when they came home, I was aware of it because I was there and I knew what was going on. But for her kids who don't live with her right now, um, that's kind of a peace of mind. And I think that's helping the kids too. You know, I can't speak for them because I haven't had a chance to talk with them directly, but I think that's definitely helping, and keeping in touch with her, you know, myself, it's definitely giving me peace of mind because I was in a funk for a couple of days. You know, it was really hitting me.
mhm.
And I was like, man, you know, this sucks. Because like I said earlier, I felt helpless. And I'm like, if this is, you know, she needs to process something and talk to something on the phone, I'm like, I can do that. So yeah.
Well, and when we were planning for today's episode,
Hmm.
some of the things we talked about is our previous experiences, and I know that being in this situation with Lori certainly brought up times in my life that I've had to be an observer,
Yeah.
sometimes from afar, like a lot
Right.
farther than I am now, but also when I had the opportunity to be present
Hmm.
and couldn't. I
Yeah.
just couldn't do it, and that walking away with the regret and guilt from that.
Yeah.
So that really informed how I handle and how I'm handling this now for Lori is I don't ever want to feel that way again. And so yeah, I um, having something that I could do, but this is still an interesting piece is that I'm still learning because in talking with Lori this week and her perspective of coming back, and it was different this time than any other time. Usually when she is recovering from things, she's almost as much there for you as you are for her during the
Mhm.
recovery. And this time was different.
Yeah.
And so, I'll probably talk about a little bit of that in a little bit, uh, but yeah, previously, for me, I had some very close people that I couldn't be present when we knew that it was really bad. Like if it's really bad, I used to duck and cover. I couldn't do it, and missed out on some really important time with loved ones.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You,
that's
you say duck and cover as you just kind of try to pretend it is not happening kind of thing.
yeah. I know what's going on. Like for example, with my grandfather was probably the first time that, well, especially as an adult, because I was a very young adult and I was extremely close to my grandpa. And I did try to go in and see him, and a lot of family was there, but seeing him in that condition, I couldn't do it. Because it wasn't how I knew him. And then a couple years ago, the same thing with my one of my aunts who I was very, very close with. She had a brain tumor and she was going downhill despite the treatments and stuff. And I didn't even call her because I just I couldn't handle it. And it was about me. So,
Yeah.
and that was very, very difficult to do it
Yeah.
to.
And I've heard a lot of stories like that, and even in the caregiving road clients I've had, some of them have family nearby, others don't. Um, and many caregivers have even experienced similar things, and because in my job as working for what I do, you know, once a client is no longer being cared for at home, our job's done. And so we have to disconnect our lives from that client. And that could mean, if they go into the hospital or something and they don't come home, that could mean I may never know what happens to them. And
Exactly, because like you said, once they go in the hospital, your job is done. And but you
yeah,
spent all this time knowing so much about
right,
this person in the current, and oftentimes
yeah,
get to know them
yeah,
for they'll tell their life stories, I'm sure.
mhm,
And then to suddenly be cut off as if, and
right,
then you don't know. You just don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah, and as a caregiver, if you're lucky enough, as if you're doing this for a job, and if you're lucky enough, you do, like Tina said, become, friends with them. You get to know that part of their life, some of their life story, maybe get to know some of their family members. So you may be lucky enough to have some communication outside of that. Like the family member might call you and say, hey, this is going on, or this is what our plans are. But that doesn't always happen. I've talked with caregivers who just all of a sudden, like a couple of weeks after they no longer work with a client, they get the call from their boss that, maybe the client had passed away, or is going to be put in a skilled nursing facility permanently. So it,
And when you're working with someone like at the level that you're working with them, you get that history, but you
mhm,
also know like what appointments they have, you
mhm,
know, when they eat, when they're not eating like they're supposed to. I mean, these details about them
mhm,
that gives you a different kind of connection.
right,
And so then all of a sudden you don't have access to even that information. Like, are
yeah,
they eating?
yeah,
They've been struggling with this. Do the doctors know this?
yeah,
And are they being aware? Are the
yeah.
family members being aware? So
And
that's
this,
a
yeah. And we as caregivers are always reminded by our union and our work and stuff, self-care, mental health days are important for all of us because, they offer, therapy and, if we need counseling just for that reason, because we do connect. And as healthcare providers, I'm not even saying just caregivers, but I mean like nurses, doctors, like you have to separate yourself from the patient and, you know, like make that, there's that the fine line. You've got to stay on the doctor or the healthcare provider side and not let that affect your life. And sometimes it's hard to do. Like you can't compartmentalize all that.
right. Well, and let's say, I mean, even the situation with Lori and her caregiver, because her caregiver was there is
Hmm.
why Lori got the medical services she needed.
True.
And and not just because her caregiver was there, but because her caregiver advocated for her and went to the mat and said, no, you guys are going to pay attention. Not that
Right.
the healthcare providers weren't paying attention, but they have a different perspective. And she was there
Yeah.
to say, no, this isn't normal.
Right.
This is normal and it's not okay. It's literally not okay. Please
Right.
look closer.
Yeah.
And because of that, Lori got the care she needed.
Yeah. And that's something good to remind you guys, as you're listening to this. If you have a family member or a friend going through healthcare stuff, make sure they have somebody on their side, because unfortunately, the medical world is not going to be on their side. And you have to advocate for them if they can't advocate for themselves. Because if that caregiver hadn't said, look, listen, look, see what's going on, she's not normally like this, we could have had a whole different, you know, message today.
Yeah, most likely would have.
Yeah. And for that, I'm eternally grateful for the caregiver.
Yes.
And there's been times, even with my clients, I've had to say, okay, you're going to the hospital. Like, I know you don't want to, but this is needed. You need to get checked. And they end up in the hospital for days because of something's wrong. And then, then later they're like, oh man, I'm glad I did go to the hospital. Thanks for, talking me into it. Because I get it. Hospitals are not fun. Most of the time, everyone I've talked to is like, I never get sleep because they're in it every hour or every couple of hours in the middle of the night. There's beeping going on. There's people in the other hallway doing things. So it's not a comfortable environment to sleep or just be aware of things. So it's not the ideal situation. Skilled nursing facilities are a little better in some ways because there's less people and there's a little more spread out, but still it's active. There's people, going up and down the halls throughout the night. Your vitals need to get checked at certain times of the day. My dad hated living in a skilled nursing facility, but because of what he needed for care, that was unfortunately the best place for him after a certain amount of time. So it's tough decisions, but I fully believe that caregiver was a main reason why Lori got the care she needed when she needed, because she'd been in and out of the ER several times over the first week or so that she'd been sick, just getting checked, getting fluids. But then it got worse, and her caregiver showed up, I think, on a Monday. So it happened on a Monday, and it was just, she'd just gone downhill over the weekend. And yeah.
Well, I
So
know over the weekend I talked to Lori and could see that she was not in a Lori space. Like it was not, it was, yeah. And I was trying to talk her in and got a lot of resistance to her going because
right.
she, over the weekend, she is on her own. And so trying to manage logistics when you're in a bad headspace because you're sick, like she couldn't cognitively function at that point, and you could see it. And so I had to talk her into calling 911 when we got off the phone so that she could go get checked out. And she did. She did a great job in managing that, like getting herself there, calling 911. Great, she got away there, but 911 isn't going to get you home, so she had to deal with that on top of everything else. And then having to communicate with the doctors at the emergency room for herself when she's not cognitively able to do that was a challenge. And so that really speaks to the importance of having healthcare and family who's able to be there, which is another piece of Monday too, is it was not just her caregiver, but one of her sons was with her as well.
Yeah, her caregiver. I think the way it was described to me is the caregiver had to actually reach out to the sons and say, like, you guys need to talk your mom into going to the hospital because she needs to go.
Yeah.
And it took a little bit of like pulling teeth to get her to go, but she finally did. And in the end, she was glad she went just because of how bad it had gotten. And unfortunately, with COVID, we've heard stories of like it sneaks up on people. All of a sudden they're fine, and then all of a sudden they're not fine. And then
right after COVID started, my mother-in-law got really, really sick, and it wasn't COVID. It had nothing to do with COVID. And but she was going downhill really, really fast. And so she was living in an assisted living facility, and but she had something had gone wrong, and so they rushed her to the emergency room. They called us and they said it's not looking good. She's not going to make it. Now again, she was placed in the same town as Lori, and so it was an hour away. So my husband rushed down there with his nephew. To no, was it his nephew, or I think it was a son? It was a son, and rushed down there to see her because they said she was dying, that she wasn't going to make it, and they wouldn't let him in because her COVID test hadn't come back yet.
Oh my God.
And so he had no place to stay while he was there, so he had to come back. And they said, "We'll call you if it gets worse." Well, they called him and said, she probably won't make it another hour. He was already back up here the next morning. And so he rushes down there. He goes to rush down there, and he couldn't make it in time. And so she passed away. So sometimes the observing is hard, and not being able to observe is really, really hard, because he didn't get that.
And I know there's that phrase going around, FOMO, fear of missing out. And I think a lot of that comes in too, we want to be there. Like, he was going down there because he wanted to be there. And then it's like, well, what do you do? Like, you can't stay there, like, because that's, in this situation, it's fear of you could miss that. And, my dad's sister, when my dad got really sick, she's like, well, I don't know when I can get there. I can get there on this day. And she's like, I can get there on July 10th. And on the 1st of July, my dad had been admitted back to his skilled nursing facility on hospice. And we'd both declined doing the additional treatment that could possibly prolong his life, but not make his life any better. And so it was just a matter of time. I picked up my dad's sister at the airport on the 10th at like 2:00 in the afternoon. We drove over to my dad's skilled nursing facility. We were there for about 4.5, 5 hours. We left at 6 p.m. We came back to my place to get settled for the night, and I got a call at 9:30 that night that he'd passed away. So had she waited one more day, she would have missed it. But she got a chance to spend the last few minutes with her brother. And I got to spend some time with my dad too, because it had been hard, because I'd gone 14 months without seeing my dad physically because of COVID. His facility was not letting visitors. And it was tough. And I saw my dad, and then he went downhill just like a week and a half after I saw him for the first time after all this drama with COVID. And I'm like, I'd been vaccinated for like 6 months. And I was like, dude, I'm vaccinated.
Doing everything we're supposed to.
Right. And I said, you guys aren't going to let me, like, well, I'm sorry, you can't go in the building. You can go sit in front of the window. And I'm like, but he doesn't have an out, like, the building was set up to a way as to where anybody who was on the outside windows could see, that like family members could go sit in front of the window. Well, my dad at the time had a room that was facing their interior lot. They had like a courtyard, like a big, garden area. So he was facing inside the garden area. So I couldn't go in because the only way to get into the garden area was to go through the building. And I'm like, I'm vaccinated and I'm a home care aide. I am a medical professional. There is no reason why I can't walk through this building. I know the policy. I know what, but no. And then when I did get to see him, I had to wear a mask and a face shield, because unfortunately the skilled nursing facility my dad was in was a sister building to one of them that had a really bad outbreak. And so they were like taking extra precautions. So my last photo with my dad, with him smiling in it, is with me with the face shield and the mask and all that, which I hate. But I'm grateful I have other pictures with him. But
right. But that's what he was seeing.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know if it's an episode we would ever want to get into, is the effects of mask wearing, literally.
Yeah, we
literally.
Yeah.
Literal mask wearing and social distancing and the effects it has. Well, I'll try to avoid to throw my
right
opinions in there. But at least discuss, like, it really took a toll.
It did. And even now, as the mandates have lifted a little and we're allowed to go into certain places without masks now, seeing people just walk past you with, smiling at you as they pass you, or, it's totally different. Like, you see it in a different light now.
Yeah.
And just knowing that my dad really coherently seeing me the last time was looking like that. I'm like, this sucks. But even so, like, if I hadn't gone at all, then I would have been missed out on that time.
Yes.
So, as an observer, it sucks. And it's like, it makes us uncomfortable, but then you got to remember, like, where are the other people who you're observing? Like, how uncomfortable are they?
Right.
Like, they don't want to be in that situation. Lori didn't want to be sick. I think she sent a picture of us one day with the nasal cannula because she was on oxygen. And she's like, look at my new necklace or something like that. So she was like making light of the situation. But it was still like, and then we're seeing that and we're like, man, we can't go visit you. We can't do anything like, physically for her. And Lori,
Right.
you all know Lori and how chatty she is. So she's a very big extrovert. So for one to see her like down and not really being as extroverted as she usually is hard. But then also not being able to go there and provide what an extrovert like Lori likes, which is communication, relationships, quality time. We couldn't do any of that like on a physical level because of all the restrictions. Yeah.
And then I think one of the things in talking to Lori this week, since she's been home, is the struggle she's having now, and we're still observers to it.
Yeah.
Because it's hard, because I think for you and then for me, there's aspects that aren't hard, because to us it's a no-brainer, and how to manage certain things when someone is sick or when someone is struggling. Most people want to jump in and do everything for another person when they're sick. It comes from a great place in their heart. They want to be helpful. They want to care for you. But the person who's sick has their own type of struggle, and they all can't always communicate it. So as the observers, we're trying to figure out the balance of like, how much do we help, and how much, how do we know when when enough is enough for them, right? Especially an extrovert like Lori, who usually is all about like, I'm going to recover. The more people around me, I'm going to recover faster. I'm going to be better, and all of these things. And this time wasn't like that. This time was, I think, the first time I've ever seen Lori like this, where she's at right now, and where she made some statements that were really impactful to me, that really stood out. And it was, I'm going to throw myself under the bus. So when I called her, it was at the end of a day for me. So I'd been doing sessions all day. And so as a mental health therapist, I'm looking for avoidance. And I'm looking for ways, how is this client putting me off so they don't have to deal with something tough? And sometimes it's okay. Sometimes I just let it go, but usually I call it out. And so Lori, I got on the phone with Lori. I'm like, hey, how's it going? How you doing? She goes, just breathing. Just breathing. And I started laughing, because that's Lori. That's, what I do. And I started laughing. I said, well, that's kind of funny. I said, you might want to keep in mind, Lori, that I just got done with a full day of sessions and people avoiding my questions. I think I sense avoidance. And she goes, well, I just got done talking to my counselor, and he said, he says, I get to choose how much I tell someone. And if they don't hear me the first time, I'm allowed to repeat it. That's why she repeated the just breathing, because I'd interjected something in there. And I started laughing. I'm like, okay, fair enough. I said, fair enough. Thank you for reminding me of that. But and then the other thing she was saying pretty consistently throughout the conversation is, I'm not in a place to tell people how to help me. Just do it or don't. And coming from Lori, I mean, I think, like literally my jaw probably dropped a little bit, because it wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. It was very firm and stern, and just in this place of like, I know my limits, and I'm sticking to them right now.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it was one of those moments where, because like she texted me, she's like, I'm just breathing. And Lori has a phrase that she says a lot, like, how are you doing? And she'll say, I'm upright and breathing. So for us, that's our used to. So when she says it, it's like, okay. But then we realize, okay, what does she struggle with for the last few weeks? And it's like, okay.
Literally each breath.
Yeah. Yeah. Each breath, because COVID is a respiratory thing. There's a lot of, respiratory complications can happen. And some of it we were noticing with Lori. So, and then not having a caregiver and being by herself throughout most of this is, so she's been having to do a lot of phone calls and trying to figure out some things. And she's like, well, how do I do this? And I said, well, set your living room up or wherever you're going to feel most comfortable to sit. I says, put your walker there, get a table, put it next to you with, whatever you're going to need for, a few hours so you can avoid or you can limit the amount of times you get up. And I said, just take it one step at a time, one breath at a time. And I was talking with her, I think last night, and she was saying something about the breathing. And I said, well, when you're sitting at watching TV or, just take a deep breath every once in a while. Because I said, your lungs are a muscle. And if the muscles aren't getting used, it's just going to atrophy. And then the muscles aren't going to want to work. So the more you just keep breathing, it's going to get better on its own. And, just sitting around can cause other things too. So it's seeing her like processing all this, but then also the positives of seeing her actually doing something like that and seeing the results is encouraging for us that we're telling her the right things, but also encouraging that it's working for her. Because for some reason, there's always those times where somebody's like, oh, well, you could just do this and it's fine. And there's always those people that want to give the advice, which is great, but is the advice actually going to be beneficial for the person you're giving it to? Yeah. And I think because I know I was communicating because her and I are in a couple of groups. So I was like basically creating a text message and then I was sending it to all these different groups and like, okay, this, I'm going here. And that was what I could do. And so, and I said, I think the last time I sent a message out was like, I know she appreciates all the messages. I'm sure check in the next few days as she's feeling better. And so she's been doing that recently. She's been checking in and thanking everybody for the encouragement and the scriptures. And she's like, well, how do I do this? Or how do I go home? And I said, well, what are your basic needs at home? And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, what are the most important things needing to be done during the week for you? I said, do you need to go to the grocery store? Yeah. I'm like, okay, well then you need to add. And I said, thankfully for her, and this is a good point, having a community around you, whether it's a church group, just a small group of friends, a family, that's going to be a huge help for you because you can send a message out to that community and say, hey, look, I need help with grocery shopping. Lori can sit on her phone and order all her groceries and have them ready to be picked up. All she has to do is say what time they're going to be picked up. So if she knows that she has somebody available at 2 p.m. to say, pick up something, she can say, okay, they're going to go pick my groceries up and they can bring them over. She has a neighbor. Her neighbor could walk and go get her mail a couple of days a week. There's just those few little things that are the most important and the rest will come. Like, Tina went over that day and she did some laundry and, gave her fresh bedding. So when she came home, she's got fresh, clean clothes and fresh linens. And, that doesn't have to be done every day. So having a community or just a group of friends that are willing to help you, and asking for help, which is hard for a lot of us, and Lori included, and myself included. It's very hard to ask for help.
But she had to, because if she didn't, then we were going to have to keep asking what she needed, which is what was driving her nuts. It's
right.
People asking her what she needed.
Yeah.
Because that meant she had to give them an answer.
Yeah.
And then, she didn't always know.
Right. And then she said, well, I just don't feel like cooking. And I said, don't. I said, ask somebody from your small group. Cause within our church body, we have small groups. I says, you've got plenty of people in your small group. I'm sure all of them would not hesitate to make you a casserole for a couple of nights. And I said, since she doesn't eat a large portion each meal, I says, that casserole might last you 4 days. But I says, that's 4 meals you don't have to come up with.
Right.
And she said, oh yeah. So they've started some sort of meal train. So people are bringing meals over or snacks and helping her with their groceries and mail trips. And again, I feel bad because I'm, 5+ hours away. So I can't be one of those people that does that, but I can help her with ideas and
Because
help.
you know her well enough to know just okay, I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to ask
Yeah,
her. I'm just going to do it.
exactly. Right. Yeah. So,
And
this is definitely
for the record, I was able to manage my playful side while I was there, and I did not mess with her.
oh,
It was nice. I normally left to my own devices, I'd have gone in there, moved things around that I know would have driven her nuts, and then
oh God.
it
But on a normal
would,
scale, that would be hilarious.
yeah, normally I'd be like, I'm gonna put this pillowcase on inside out.
Or like fluff the bed or leave it
Yeah,
unmade. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Or
She'd flip.
leave a sock on the bathroom floor.
Oh yeah, yeah. Leave the lint sitting on top of the dryer.
Yeah, yeah. Move something to the freezer that shouldn't be there. Maybe a sock. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So in talking kind of all about that, so I guess a great way to, kind of segue into, so we've talked a lot about what's been going on, how we've been doing things, but how do we deal? Like how do we deal with what's going on? Because I think a lot of the questions are, like I said earlier, it was really hitting me hard, like, and unexpectedly, because usually when she goes in the hospital, I can handle it, I'm communicating with people and we know what's going on. This was a little different than normal. Um, so how do we balance like being optimistic and positive with being realistic?
Mhm. Um, I think in the case with Lori, a couple things. First of all, with Lori, I just tend to be real. I don't tend to pull any punches because she's got enough people in her life that do that for her, that try to get her to be positive. Because Lori's actually one of the ones who taught me a great lesson many years ago. Is that one day she looked at me, she goes, "I'm tired. I'm sick, but I'm tired of having to be strong." And I looked at her, I was like, "Well, what does it mean to be strong?" And she goes, "Well, I'm tired of never, always have the cheerful face on, the optimism, looking at the silver lining, all of this. Sometimes I just need to not." I was like, "Well, that doesn't mean you're not strong. Matter of fact, that kind of means that you are strong when you can sit in that place of how bad things really are and face it." So, but it was hard for her to be able to say, "I'm too tired to do this thing you want me to do." So that was something I had to watch her learn how to do. She's sporadically good at it, sporadically not. But what I learned with Lori is sometimes the most effective approach was just being real. Like, "No, Lori, this really does suck.
Yeah.
This really is scary. I'm scared. You're scared. We're both scared."
Mm-hmm.
So I think in a lot of cases, our natural instinct is wanting to lift people up and be positive and be, always the silver lining. Like, don't get stuck in that, because it makes us uncomfortable when other people are in pain or suffering.
Right.
And so being okay to be real,
Yeah.
um, I think is a thing that I found to be effective. And then it hit me hard this time too. Normally I'm like you said, okay, this is unfortunately, part of Lori's journey has been in and out of hospitals and up and down on the health scale. Been a lot more ups lately than downs because she's been taking a lot of control back,
Mm-hmm.
which has been really great. But this time, you're right. This time was different. I was sitting at a prayer group and I got the text messages coming in from her caregiver and you and whatnot. I think even another friend at one point. And it just hit me, like I just suddenly just kind of sat there and it hit me, and I broke down a bit because I just felt like this time was different. And so and of course we do what we do. We put on a good face, we put on a good mask, and we get through it. Of course had the prayer team
Right.
praying for her and whatnot. But then we left, and I just kind of trying to get through the
Mm-hmm.
day. But my days are working with people in very traumatic places. So I'm carrying that load on top of worrying about Lori, on top of, you know, my husband's health. And so that's all just sitting there, and I'm trying to pretend like nothing's wrong.
Right.
And so by Tuesday afternoon, I was like crying in between sessions. I was just breaking down. I'm like, I couldn't even tolerate the thought of another day like that. So I called my boss and said, you know, I'm going to have to take the advice I give my clients. I need to take a couple of days. I can't do this. It's not fair to my clients, and it's not fair to me to be in this space right now. I'm not going to give my clients what they need. So I took a couple of mental health days. And then this week I came back and I told my clients why I was gone. I mean, I didn't give them Lori's story, but I said, look, my life hit some points where I had no control.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, what would I tell my clients to do?
Right.
Figure out what is the one thing I do have control of. And I did it.
Yeah, and that's super important. You know, because I know, and even in caregiving world, like mental health days, like we were talking counseling earlier, like mental health days are important, because if I can't be at 100%, that means I can't give my clients 100%. And that's not fair to them, because they're not at 100% themselves, or they wouldn't need a caregiver.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so I needed, you know, and I knew I was going to take one day off, I think last week, and then I kind of pushed it, and I was like, well, I'll just kind of just veg out on the weekend and just kind of, you know, process through what's going on. But then it got to like Sunday night, Monday morning, and I'm thinking, I just mentally cannot go to work. Like I was done. And so I took a mental health day this past week, and, you know, just process through. And, you know, and what I did that day was pray, and, you know, I communicated. I think I talked with Lori for a little bit, just to kind of process through everything. And I know that her and I had a conversation last week when she was in the hospital. Something had happened. Oh yeah. So she'd been notified that her caregiver was finding another client. And so she was pretty upset. And, you know, the caregiver, rightfully so, like I've been in that situation, and, you know, needing a job. Unfortunately, Lori was in the hospital, so her caregiver wasn't getting paid. So unfortunately, you know, to keep, you know, your pay, you have to pick up another client, which, you know, is no fun, but is necessary. So, you know, there were some other situations along with that, but I was talking to Laura, and I said, well, you know, I says, maybe this is a blessing in disguise. I says, you like to put positive spins on everything, so let's put a positive spin on this. And so we kind of talked it through, and we realized that, you know, her caregiver actually is planning on moving away from the area in a few months anyways. So Lori would have had to have gotten a new caregiver at that time. So maybe the blessing was that now Lori's getting it done sooner than waiting a few more months.
And learning to have a backup plan.
Yep. And she's working on getting a backup plan and having other people listed as caregivers. So if one is sick or unable to be there, or she's got backups already listed and ready to go, so this doesn't have to happen again. Because right now we're scrambling to figure out how to get what network we have to communicate with to get this person hired so they can start working with her to get paid. And it's just a mess, because it's not just one person doing all of it. It's, you know, the case manager agrees to the person, then they have to go through another program, then they have to go through this company to get this part of it hired. And it's just, it's a mess. And
then you're hoping that caregiver that you chose doesn't get another job.
Right. Or doesn't, doesn't get discouraged and just give up. So prayerfully, you know, things will continue to progress as they are. So yeah, it's, you know, and Lori appreciated that, you know, sitting and processing and kind of putting a positive spin on it, because she kind of hadn't thought about that, but it's not expected. I'm like, I don't expect you to put a positive spin on it. You're in the hospital, you're feeling like crud. That's okay.
And you don't have to accept the positive spin on it. You can be
right.
like, yeah, I don't really need you shining me on right now.
Right.
Right. But at least it's having that communication. And some people you can safely say, like, I'm just not in the mood to be positive. Others you have to kind of, they need a little care too. Like they're a little more sensitive.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, and I know, she's like, well, I'm gonna have to think about that. And so and since then we've talked, and she's like, yes, this is, this is a blessing in disguise. I'm looking at it like that. And I was like, well, I said, that's one way to do it. I said, and as I was talking with her the first time about it, I was like, it's okay to be mad
Yeah.
because this is a bad situation. I said, it's
Yes.
no fun. I says,
Yes.
you have every right to be upset. And I says, but let's process through that and get through that. So, and I think communication is probably a huge key on, self-care, communication, taking those mental health days, communicating why you're taking a mental health day. Um, and also being able in your own body and with it for others too, recognizing what's going on. Like, why am I feeling like this crud? Well, that's probably, am I depressed? Is this causing me depression? Is this causing me to be on edge? Is that giving me anxiety? Like, what are these signs? Because then you'll know, like, in the future, if this happens again, like those signs, like, oh, last time this caused me some depression. So how can I resolve that? Or how can I work on it? Because sometimes you don't see it.
Well, and for me, I know it was the fact that I was crying without any specific thought causing me to cry. Like I was just crying. And then dreading, the feeling of dread was another big indicator. And that's something I worked with my client. I talked to my clients about this week. Is like, look, I know myself well enough to know that those two things are red flags. They're big red
Right.
flags because they're not how I am. They're not the way I typically am. And so they were standout things that I could see going, okay, yeah, I could probably push through. I probably
Right.
could have. I didn't cry through my sessions. I just would cry between sessions. And usually once that door closes, the rest of the world doesn't exist except for that session in that moment.
Mm,
Um, so I could have, and I
mm,
certainly have in the past. But at some point, I would have crashed,
yeah.
and it would have been uh, more damaging to myself and to others had I let it continue like I have in the past.
Yeah.
And usually that's when big fights with loved ones happen,
Yeah.
and so,
And yeah,
but
sometimes that
I was,
involves those ugly cries, that you talk about,
yeah,
they talk about in the movies and stuff. Oh, I ugly cried.
yeah,
It's kind of one of those, you just full on have that breakdown.
yep. And so, but I'm grateful because I got to use it as an example with clients of like, look,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm educated. Yeah, I know all about mental health for you. But I
Yeah.
have to also be aware of it for myself, and this is what it looks like. So when you have to do it, it's okay. We all have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's okay for a counselor to have a counselor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or yeah, just yeah, self-care. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's,
And I think um another thing I was thinking too is there may be some tension. I have not experienced this, but I've heard about it where people will sometimes, like, three or four siblings are not there for mom and dad, or like say you have five siblings and only three of them show up when mom or dad's in the hospital, and then the other two don't show up, and then it's like there's that tension within the family, like, well, you didn't show up when mom and dad were sick, or you didn't do this. But I think it's important to recognize that sometimes the reasons why we don't show up aren't necessarily because we don't want to be there.
yeah, I got real lucky on the two situations that stand out to me. I mean, there are other ones that I wasn't able to be there for, but the two that really stand out to me as affecting me in the way it did on my grandpa and my aunt. When my grandpa passed away, a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff were able to be there. And I was a very young adult. I mean, I was like maybe 20, 21. And I always was, not only did I feel bad that I let my grandpa down, I felt like I let my grandpa down and I missed him, but I thought that I let my family down, that they would judge me. I'd actually shown up and had to run out. I'd run out because I couldn't do it. And so I carried with me for a period of time. not real super long because my family was very attuned to that and were able to reassure me that, number one, none of them judged me for it. They all wanted to run too. Number two, my grandpa wasn't with it enough, which is why I ran, because it was hard to see him like that. He wasn't with it enough to know that. He knew I was there at one point, but then, he didn't know I ran. So that helped. And then when my aunt passed, and she lived in another state, but my sister had gone to see her, and which was really, really great and whatnot. And I felt guilty and I felt jealous that she got that time with my aunt. But she was kind, and she made sure I knew that my aunt had a message from me before she passed. And so my sister made sure I knew that, and that my aunt understood why I couldn't be there. Or call. She knew that I was just wired that way. And so she made sure to tell my sister a message for me.
Right.
So,
Yeah. My dad's mom, when she passed away, she was living in Minnesota and she was sick. And we packed up our RV in the middle of February and drove from Washington all the way back to Minnesota in hopes to make it in time. And she talked with my dad. And right before she passed away, we stopped on the North Dakota, Minnesota border for a rest because we were literally driving straight through. And when we stopped, my dad's like, I just feel off. And we got to my aunt's house in the town that she was living in, where my grandmother was, and we found out that she'd just passed away, like within about the time that we stopped. So the reason why my dad felt off is because he felt her passing away. And we were told that my other cousin, who was a lot younger than my dad, obviously, but he was kind of the same build as my dad. My grandmother was a little out of it. She actually thought my cousin was my dad.
That's what happened with my grandpa. Yeah.
So for my grandma, she felt like she'd seen her son, so she felt like it was okay to go. And I think my dad was definitely, as an observer, it sucked for him not being able to see her. And it was no fun. I was 13, 14 years old. So I was, a young teen. And, but I don't know if he would have handled it well if he'd actually seen his mom before she passed. So, but yeah, I mean, and there were, things, and it was nice because we were there for about a week, got to process with the family and kind of get through some things. But it's tough. Like, it's tough to deal with. And I think there was a little bit of fear of missing out for my dad, missing out on that moment. But I choose to remember those times, the positive times, the fun times that we had, with her. And I think that's another thing. Is like, if it comes to a point where you do end up losing a friend or a family member, remember the good times. Don't dwell on the negative.
It doesn't get us anywhere. And right. I think that's the other thing too, is that when we are observers, and even if in this case, like with Lori, where, praise God, she didn't pass away, but that risk was there. Yeah. So to be compassionate and understanding that everybody processes that differently. Yeah. So if you see someone who's not doing it the way you would do it, or being present the way you would be present, just to understand that risk is there and everybody deals with that differently. And I don't know that sure there's a wrong way to do it. Obviously wrong ways to do it. Right. But I think generally speaking, most of the time there's not really a set wrong or right way to observe family members who are in vulnerable places, or friends who are in vulnerable places. We have to rely on that vulnerable person to tell us what their boundaries are, and they're not always able to. Yeah. And if they do manage to muster up the strength, I want to say this: if a person who is sick manages to muster up the strength to tell you what their boundaries are, respect it, because it took a lot for them to do that. So if they're saying, look, I can't handle company right now, I
Right.
can't handle responding to texts immediately right now, don't take that personally. That has nothing to do with you, the observer. That has to do with them being able to manage the strength to tell you that.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard. So I would also say, watch for tells that a person might be overwhelmed and not able to take care of your feelings while they're sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
think I channeled a little bit of it, Lori, in that statement.
Yeah. All right. Well, we had a little bit of a heavy topic today, but I think it was very important to talk about. Definitely because we wanted to acknowledge why Lori wasn't here, but also talk because it's definitely a mask we can put on, and there's masks we put on. And as an observer, we feel like sometimes we have to be the strong one. You don't have to be the strong one, but it's okay to compartmentalize and take your moment and take your mental health days and be, and also, help those people any way you can. And if they ask you not to help them, that's okay too. Um, and thankfully in this situation, Lori is, does need help. She's asking for help, which is good. And we're hoping she'll be back on the mend enough that maybe she can join us with the next episode, which is, I'm grateful, prayers were definitely answered. We had prayer groups going all over, for her, and a lot of people praying for her and, pulling for her. And,
Absolutely.
she has a lot to live for too. She's got a couple of grandchildren. She's got a couple of grandchildren on the way. And her kids wanted her there for that. And so, that gave her encouragement to kind of keep pushing through because she wants to be there for that. Especially knowing what she's discussed on the podcast already about, she was told she wasn't going to live 7 years past when she was diagnosed with her first liver disease. And she's well surpassed that and has experienced so many things that she never could have had, had she just curled up in a ball back then and said, I'm okay, I'm going to die. She didn't do that. And so there's always that encouragement that, things can get better. And unfortunately, there are times when they, unfortunately they don't. And so like we were talking, it's okay to be realistic and it's okay to be optimistic. And sometimes you got to do both,
Yes. Yes. It is definitely okay to do both. It is okay to sit in it for a minute.
Yeah.
People get scared to do that because they feel like they're going to get swept away by it. And there is that, honestly, there is that risk, but not really a big risk.
Right.
And usually if you have people around you who can catch that, say, hey, wow, this feels like it's been a long time, or this feels like deep, I'm going to send you a lifeline. But otherwise, the only way to get somewhere is to get through it. So, yeah. And it's not a weakness.
Right.
It's not a weakness to cry. It's not a weakness to say, I'm struggling today.
Yeah, true. Okay, so just a friendly reminder, anything that discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or replacement for a conversation with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or medical professionals. This episode is available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as BehindTheMaskPC. And if you don't use social media, you can email us at BehindTheMaskPC@gmail.com. Feel free to review us on Anchor, leave feedback on the platform you listen to us on, or message us through our social media or email because we'd love to hear what you think. If there's a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, feel free to message us and we'll see about making it happen. You can find EJ on Twitter and Instagram as EJ8302. And if you'd like to support this podcast and keep episodes coming, you can monetarily support us by visiting anchor.fm/BehindTheMaskPC/support. And on behalf of T and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.